Hello, today's Bible study comes from Luke chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and it reads as follows. Now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with the sacrifices. Jesus answered, Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. Or those 18 who died when the Tower of Siloam fell on them? Do you think they were more guilty than all the other living in Jerusalem? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will perish. Then he told his parable. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but it did not find any. He did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, For 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on the fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Sir, the man replied, Leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down. Well, in this passage, it's talking about repenting. And it starts off, Now there were some present at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood had been mixed with sacrifices. And it speaks to Pilate. And Pilate was known for being a little brutal at times, and sent some men out dressed like common folk and killed the Jewish Galileans. And Jesus answered, Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? Well, that answer is no. And Jesus says, I tell you no. But he does tell you what you have to do before it gets to be that bad. But unless you repent, unless you repent, you too will all perish. And when he speaks of perish, he's talking about your physical and your spiritual death. Because you can perish from this world, you can be killed physically, but it's the spiritual death, the one that can cast your soul into damnation, is the one that you're worried about and you should worry about. And Jesus makes this known. You can perish, but unless you repent, and when you repent, you're repenting for what you have done. You are changing your mind and asking the Lord for forgiveness and to change your mind and heart. So he tells them, You too will perish. You will die just like these Galileans did. And sin is sin. And when you see, do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans? No. Sin is sin. Or those 18 who died when the Tower of Siloam fell on them. Now, Jesus speaks to the physical thing, a physical thing of nature where this tower fell on them. Do you think that they were worse than these ones? Do you think that they were more guilty than all the other living in Jerusalem? So the ones that were spared, that weren't killed, do you think they were more guilty than them? The answer still is no. And Jesus says, I tell you no. And then he goes into it. He says, But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Paul's first message, or I'm sorry, John's first message coming out the wilderness, repent. Jesus' first message, repent. The reason you repent is to get right with God, to acknowledge your faults. And you have to know repenting is needed. Jesus' warning that they must repent or perish had an immediate and chilling fulfillment. Those citizens of Jerusalem who had not repented and turned to Jesus perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. And you can't say that somebody's suffering is connected, inevitably connected, but we can say that the nations national sin and suffering were connected. If we choose the wrong ways, we will be punished. Israel's disobedience, roaming. So we need to repent, and we have to repent. Then Jesus tells the parable. And it said, he also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. First of all, if you come to seek fruit on a tree that's barren, the tree is no good. It produces no fruit. You would tear it down. There would be no need for you to waste your time taking care of it. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, look, at the 3 years I have come seeking fruit on the fig tree and find none. And these are things that are common to the people. And what does Jesus tell him? He says, cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? Why is it taking up space if it is not fruitful, if it doesn't produce? But he answered and said to him, sir, let it alone this year until I dig around it and fertilize it, and it bears fruit. Well, but if not after that, you can cut it down. Well, he came seeking fruit. After this warning, unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. Jesus uses this parable to tell them about God's judgment, what was coming. If you don't produce fruit, the Lord will cut down that fig tree. There's no need for it. The fruit of our life shows what kind of person we really are. The fruit of us. What are we doing? What do we do? If we're good, we should bring forth good fruit. An apple tree brings forth an apple. An orange tree brings forth an orange. We should be bringing forth fruit, and we should bring forth fruit that represents us. You won't see an apple tree bringing forth a pineapple. So why is a good tree bringing forth bad fruit? Just food for thought. And the fruit that the Lord is looking for, it definitely has to be the fruit of the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit tells you what it is if you look in Galatians 5:22 through 23. But don't get so cocky just to look there. Look above it. I think it's like verse 19 through 21, and see what man normally goes through. Because we need the fruit of the Spirit. And remember, that's love, joy, peace, forbearance, joy, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit. Let it alone this year. The certain man in the parable illustrated to be patient in God's judgment, of God in judgment. He waited. God was patient. He waited and gave it a second chance. God gives us a second chance. The certain man who is considered God in the parable, he did not leave the tree alone. He gave it special care. When God shows us special care, he gives us time to get right, to do things right. But he is still nourishing to the tree and preparing it for fruit bearing to come. If not after that time, no. If you don't do it after that time, and we got a time, cut it down. And the man who's cut it down, God was just. God is just at all times. And his judgment says to cut it down. There finally would come a day of reckoning for this tree, as there will come a day of reckoning for this tree. And if you're not useful to the Lord, you invite a harsh judgment to come upon you. God gives second chances all the time, but there is only one final chance. So get ready, repent, bear good fruit, call upon the Lord, change your mindset in the things that you do, because What we do is not pleasing to the Lord. It is His will and not our will. Amen.